Interrelated concepts that ultimately contribute to how you can configure Design Manager to properly record your revenue and cost of goods sold for various goods and services that you purchase from your vendor and sell to your clients. Primarily, we're going to be focusing on the topics of component types, company default accounts, and sales categories. Now, as these concepts are nearly identical in both Design Manager and Design Manager Professional, I'll be focusing primarily in Design Manager to reduce the distraction of switching between the platforms. If you do have a question on the Professional platform, feel free to ask during one of the question periods, and I'll be happy to discuss it. Lastly, we are ultimately configuring how our financial statements, particularly the income statement, will be affected with our discussion on sales categories. Therefore, you should always consult your accounting professional and, if need be, Design Manager technical support before changing any of these settings if you are unsure of the consequences of them. Okay, let's get started. Let's first discuss the concept of component types within Design Manager. Component types allow you to categorize the goods and services that you purchase from your vendor. And Design Manager comes pre-configured with 6 various component types that are defined on the Company Advanced Options window. To get there, we go to File, Company Settings, which brings us to our Company Information window, and then we click the Advanced button. And the component types are described and defined on the General tab, and there they are. Just to quickly show how to access the same information in Professional, in Pro, we'd go to the General Ledger drop-down menu, Company Information and Settings, and our Company Information window is very similar, Advanced button, and there are the component types on the General tab of the Company Advanced Options in Pro. Let's get back over to Design Manager. So, here they are. Now, you can define component types. Design Manager comes pre-configured with the ones listed here, 2 of which, merchandise and time, must be are fixed, and Design Manager has special functions for those, so those you can't alter. However, all of the other 4 are entirely customizable. Well, why would you change these? Well, any genre of good or service that you want to track separately within the software can be its own component type. Moreover, though, for purchases that have a different tax structure, they should definitely be their own component type. For example, depending on your locale, certain goods and services may or may not be taxable at all. For example, some areas don't tax freight or shipping, while many others do. Or certain goods and services could have a different tax rate. I know, for example, in New York City, the sales tax on merchandise has an entirely different rate than it does on design fee. So those 2 would need to be separate component types so Design Manager can tax those classified components appropriately. Or you may want to change the types just for aesthetics. For example, you might not want crating as one of your component types and have no need to track crating purchases and resale in Design Manager, and you'd rather have your installation and labor broken out separately. Well, you can do so. I could change crating to installation, and you can see it automatically updates throughout the software, and I could break my installation and labor separately. Or I just might not like the term freight, and I want to have shipping as my title throughout the software. Absolutely can do so. So you have full control over those 4 wildcard component types. Also, many settings in Design Manager can be customized by component type. For example, you can set how the pricing structure for each component type can be changed. I might want to mark up merchandise at 30%, but I want to mark up my shipping and freight at 10%, etc. And you can even customize how various component types appear on documents like your proposal. I could show my freight or shipping at the bottom of the document, or I could combine it with the merchandise price for a single price to the client, or I can even list it beneath each item. So these component types allow you to really customize your experience in Design Manager for each of these various types of goods and services that you want to follow throughout the software. Let's take a quick look here. Component types also can be used to filter various reports, so you can really track profitability, order tracking, and such by component types throughout the software. For example, let's take a look at our reports. There's even a freight analysis or component type analysis report just to monitor various the various component types. For example, let's take a look at all of our installation and labor. I can use the installation labor analysis report just to see all of the costs and prices, both estimated and actual, for these particular component types throughout the software. I can even search or filter throughout the software upon component type. For example, I might want to use my specification search window, and again, I might want to find all of my labor and installation component types. So I can select component type, installation and labor, and just like that, I can narrow down every single component in Design Manager only to show me those of our installation and labor type. So these component types really become fundamental in Design Manager. So it can classify the good or service from the vendor, and then I can do analysis on it through our different reportings. I can filter and search upon that component type as well. But most important to our discussion today, however, is that the component type is the first determination of what revenue and cost of goods sold accounts are ultimately going to be used upon invoicing your client and you're receiving invoices from your vendor, respectively. Let's see how. Let's go back to our company information window. Notice we have tabs for both our sales and cost of goods sold accounts. And on this tab, there's an array of all of my sales or revenue accounts, one for each of my component types. And in my example, I have all of my component types. I've already created individual revenue accounts for each type. My merchandise will be going into my furniture revenue account, freight into freight, crating into crating, etc. Now, I don't have to do that. For example, I might want my perhaps design fee and design time all to go into the 41,600 professional services time account, so that on my income statement, those accounts, that activity would be a single number, but I still want to track or break out my design fee and time differently, again, if they're taxed differently, for example, or any of the other reasons we discussed. Or, like in my example, we could have individual sales or revenue accounts for each of these component types. In the same vein, our cost of goods sold accounts also have, again, this array of cost of goods sold accounts for each of our component types. Notice in this case, rather than the 4s, we're using the 5 to 50,000s for our cost of goods sold accounts. And again, as you can see, I have an individual one for each of my component types. So I can track this activity throughout the software into my income statement exactly. Now, the default sales accounts and COGS accounts in our company information window are very important. For when I go to invoice my clients, if I don't override my my revenue account further down in the design process, which we'll get to shortly, these are the accounts that I'm going to use for each of these types when I invoice the client on the sales accounts. And conversely, I'll use my cost of goods sold accounts again when I receive the bills from the vendor if I don't override the desired set of accounts. Well, how do I do that overriding? That leads us to our third concept today, and that's the ultimate concept of our sales categories. Sales categories are extremely important concept in Design Manager. They allow us now to classify the goods or service to which we are selling our clients. So we have the component types on the vendor side and the sales categories almost on the client side. Design Manager comes pre-configured with a set of sales categories, but you can fully customize them to mirror your particular business model. In Design Manager, they're located off our glossary listing, sales categories, and there they are. And in Professional, you would access the sales categories also off the glossary listing drop-down and sales categories. And you can see the windows are very similar. Sales categories can be used to answer questions that arise, such as, how much profit did I make on furniture this year? Or what was my total cost of my artworks for the Smith project, for example? And many reports in Design Manager can be run by sales, utilizing the sales category as either a grouping or a filtering option. For example, if we look at our profit analysis report, I can run the report sorted by sales category. And this will show me per project how much I've sold to my client and paid for my vendor for all of my various sales categories. As we can see, for the Carter's Pennington home, we can see our accessories, our artwork, all of our furniture, etc. So no matter what account I have associated with each of these component type, part of these sales categories, I can use the sales categories as a further classification and a further breakdown of the types of goods and services that I'm selling to the client. Now, just like we saw on our company information window, here's our sales accounts. Each of our sales category also has a set of sales or revenue accounts and cost of goods sold accounts. So I can use the sales category to quote-unquote override the accounts that I want affected upon selling a good or service to the client or purchasing it from the vendor, as I define it by the sales category. So for artwork, for example, I don't want to use the furniture merchandise default company sales account. I want to use my custom artwork revenue account. But for freight, crating, installation, etc., I'm choosing to use the company default. So as this option is selected, I'll always be using the currently selected account on the company sales accounts. And you can even see these fields are what we call disabled. I can't edit them from here because they're coming right from the company. And a very handy feature is, if I do use the company default option, I can simply change my freight account, for example, and it'll update all of my sales categories that are using the company default freight account. Similarly, we can look at, floor coverings, and we can see that again, rather than using my default merchandise furniture sales account, I'm using my specific floor covering sales account. In step with that, if we look at our COGS accounts, I'm not using my merchandise 51900 furniture account, I'm using the 51800 floor coverings account. So you can see how these sales categories can be utilized to override what revenue and cost of goods sold accounts we want ultimately affected upon selling a particular item and component. So, how do all of these concepts relate? Let's take a look. Let's look at our income statement. Now, I configured our data for today so that I have nothing listed in either my sales or revenue or cost of goods sold for the current fiscal 09. That's going to be our starting point. Slide that over. Now, I also configured a few sample items that will allow us to illustrate how all of this works together. Under the Carter's Pennington home, I've created some artwork for guest bedroom 1, along with some artwork for guest bedroom 2. Guest bedroom 1, I have opted to not include a sales category This is the area in Design Manager where you associate the sales category with the particular item. This gives me the opportunity to then override the revenue and cost of goods sold accounts, as we saw, and associate the item with a particular classification. And we have a cost on the artwork for item 1, for guest bedroom 1, of $1,000 with a price of $1,300. Now, for guest bedroom 2, I have another item, artwork for guest bedroom 2. In this case, I have opted to include a sales category for artwork. And in this case, our cost is $600 with a price to the client of $780. So we can use these two items as a very concrete example of how all of this interrelates. Let's go ahead and create a client invoice for those items. Remember, Design Manager is an accrual-based accounting system, so upon creating the invoice to the client, that's where we're actually generating our revenue along with a lot of other accounts simultaneously. So if we go to Invoice the Carters, for our two pieces of artwork, we can watch how it affects our income statement directly. So let's go ahead and invoice the artwork for the 2 bedrooms. Here we go. There's guest bedroom 1, guest bedroom 2, looks lovely. Close and accept. And let's see what happened behind the scenes. Let's go back to our income statement again. And now we certainly should see some revenue being accrued. And we have. For our guest bedroom 1, notice that we're putting that $1,300 of revenue into our furniture sales account. Why? Because we chose not to have the sales category associated with it. No sales category associated, so we go back to our company information default sales category. And for merchandise, which this artwork is classified as the component type, it's going to always go to the furniture revenue account. Now, that might not be very desirable for artwork, so we'll discuss that in a moment. Guest bedroom 2, however, again, we did use the artwork sales category, which is associated with the 41,300 art revenue account. And we can see on our income statement that our artwork, that $7,800 that we invoiced the client for the artwork in guest bedroom 2, did go into the appropriate art revenue account. Likewise, let's flip the coin onto the other side. I've already created a purchase order for our artwork for Legacy Antiques, and we can see again in our original income statement we have no cost of goods sold being shown. So let's make an invoice from the vendor for our 2 pieces. Sales category discussion. Today's date is just fine. And we can see guest bedroom 1 has $1,000 of cost, while guest bedroom 2 has $600 of cost. If we hit OK, there is our vendor invoice being recorded. And as many of you can imagine, let's take a look at our income statement. Looking down at our cost of goods sold now, just like the revenue, I'm putting the cost of the guest bedroom 1 artwork into our furniture COGS account, while the cost of the guest bedroom 2 goes into our art cost of goods account. So, as you can imagine, we receive many calls, particularly at the end of the fiscal year or right in time for tax time, with clients and Design Manager users wondering why certain revenue accounts do not have the appropriate activity or the activity one may assume, or same with the cost of goods sold, why is everything in my furniture cost of goods sold, but I have nothing in floor coverings or wall treatments or window treatments, etc.? 9 times out of 10, that becomes from either a sales category being set up incorrectly, incorrect sales categories being used, or in the case of our example, no sales category being used. So would I want my artwork that I had in guest bedroom 1 to go into my furniture revenue account? Generally not. So I would much rather have my users to be required to enter a sales category. Luckily, Design Manager can be configured to do so. So one of the settings back on our company information window, company information, advanced, general tab, we have a require sales category option. When this is selected, I'm forced to input a sales category on each of my items. And it's even retroactive. So if I go into my guest bedroom 1 and we edit our artwork for guest bedroom, it's going to say, listen, Brad, you must fill in a sales category for this item, and I would do so. However, that is most certainly not going to then affect my income statement account. I would still need to manually either back out the invoice and create it properly, or I could use a more advanced feature such as a journal entry or something along those lines to correct my activity. But if we have our sales categories configured properly from the beginning, that will never be an issue. So my recommendations are, 1, if you do have a more advanced set of revenue and cost of goods sold accounts that you want to be properly affected each time the user makes invoices for clients and vendors, I suggest to indeed set the require sales category option. Further, I also recommend printing out under glossary listings, sales categories, our sales category listing report. And I would review this both with myself, the principals, and even perhaps my accounting professional to ensure that each of my sales categories have the appropriate accounts associated with them. Again, that will prevent us from being panicked come tax time and having revenue and cost of goods sold all lumped into one account or into a wide variety of incorrect accounts. And with that, we've taken 3 complicated and separate topics and discussed how all 3 of them interrelate. We talked about how the component types are used at the component level or vendor level, where you can classify the purchase, and how we can even customize those to our needs on the Company Advanced Options window. And then we saw how those relate to the company sales and cost of goods sold default accounts, which will be used for each of the component types when we don't have a sales category. And then we discussed how sales categories are the ultimate override on a per item basis, where we can craft exactly where we want the activity of the revenue and cost of goods sold to go upon invoicing the client and vendor respectfully. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on our brief yet in-depth discussion on sales categories. And I know those were some complicated topics, so Liz, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to discuss anything else in greater detail.
Brad, we don't have any questions.
Fantastic. That means that everyone has a great concept of accounting and all of that. If you do have any questions, feel free to email us at support@designmanager.com, and I'll be happy to turn it over to Liz to conclude today.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks to everyone who attended today. We are going to end things here, but we invite you to email support@designmanager.com with any other questions you have about the software. We hope that you enjoyed today's webinar, and if you would like to join us for our next webinar, please visit designmanager.com to register. Or if you would like to see a recorded version of this webinar, or you missed one of our previous webinars, please visit our YouTube channel, Design Manager. Thank you again, and we hope you have a great afternoon.